Ok, benvenuti, welcome to Titubanti Testi 12. And tonight we are going to discuss a very interesting text, a very intriguing text on animals, elephants, by Pliny the Elder, the Roman encyclopedist from the 1st century of the Common Era. And it is my pleasure to introduce the two speakers tonight, Marco Vespa, who is joining us from Jerusalem, and Marco Caracciolo, who is joining us from Ghent. Marco Vespa is a classicist, as you know, and is an expert on animal studies. And Marco Caracciolo is not a classicist, but is a specialist also on animal studies and eco-criticism, and is a specialist of rather contemporary English literature, my colleague at Ghent. I'm sure this is going to be a very intriguing conversation between the two of you guys. So thank you so much for doing this. And as you know, the first who speaks is always the one who accepted the proposal of the other. So Marco Caracciolo in this case would be first. And also, if you can say something about, since I'm not going to introduce you properly, wherever you want, you can say why, for example, you decided to discuss this text, both of you, if you want to say something related to your own research path. Marco Caracciolo, your micro, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Thank you for the invitation, Marco, from Misano, but also thank you for suggesting the text, Marco Vespa. Yeah, I thought this was a very interesting read that resonates with my background and certainly in animal studies or eco-criticism, as Marco from Misano said, but also with work I've done some time ago in the field of cognitive approaches to literature, and maybe that is where I want to start my very short analysis of this passage, which revolves around 3 keywords. I'm curious whether some of those are shared with Marco Vespa. They are, well, spectacle, vulnerability, and collectivity. I'm really interested in how Pliny works towards an experience that can be maybe described as interspecies empathy, without too much overstatement, I don't know. But certainly a sense of sharing affects across the human non-human divide. So we start from spectacle, which obviously has to do with the context where these encounters, to put it maybe euphemistically, take place, but also has to do with the very pronounced visual and kinesthetic dimension of the text. There are references to elephants throwing people into the air, objects falling or people falling. So all of this, I think, is very kinetic. And this is where my background in cognitive approaches to literature comes into play. So here, drawn to the way in which this text builds on the reader's embodied involvement to create essentially an immersive experience. But I think here the immersion is kind of targeted and seems to draw the reader into the animal's perspective, or at least seems to reduce the distance between the reader, the human spectators in the arena, and the animals at the center of the arena. So in the language of cognitive approaches to literature, we could say that readers imaginatively enact these bodily actions, which are performed by the animals through a process of embodied simulation or resonance. So these traces of movement resonate in the reader's body. And that is one way in which the passage invites us to let go of human on human distinction, because obviously movement is something that we share with these animals at the center of the text. So that was the first keyword. Moving now to vulnerability. Obviously here, quite literal. We have the vulnus, the wound that is suffered by the wounds actually that are suffered by the animals, and I find this interesting because vulnerability has become an important focus of work in animal studies. I'm thinking in particular of Anat Pick's 2011 book, Creaturely Poetics, which argues that mortality and vulnerability, and of course their literary representation, can serve as a bridge between the human and the animal. So here, even more than the animal's throwing behavior, it's the description of the disabled elephant's legs that I think is something that we can relate to on a very visceral, certainly embodied level, maybe also a level that is reflective, that kind of bypasses our more conceptual awareness or cultural awareness of separation between humans and animals. So I think this is a very central aspect of the passage. And thirdly, I want to talk about collectivity. Here, my main reference point is Deleuze and Guattari's concept of becoming animal, which, of course, as you know, has had wide circulation in animal studies, posthumanist discourse more generally. So, like in most cases with Deleuze and Guattari, this is a very elusive concept. But I think essentially it's working towards a critique or a collapse of binary distinctions between human subjectivity and animality. And of course, that collapse is conveyed through affect. But what is maybe less often discussed in relation to becoming animal is the collective dimension of this process that Deleuze and Guattari describe. So it's not about individual human beings becoming animal. It's really a collective project. Or as they put it, it's a quotation from Deleuze and Guattari's work: becoming animal always involves a pack, a band, a population, a peopling, in short, a multiplicity. I think this dimension, this communal dimension, is very nicely illustrated by especially the second half of the passage, how it transitions from a single dead elephant to a whole band of elephants acting in unison. And I think it is maybe here, this is the peak moment for the breakdown of human and non-human distinctions in this excerpt. It's this animal assemblage that invites the audience most forcefully, I think, to forget about the cultural encounter of this, cultural context of this animal encounter, in order to really focus on the animal's suffering. And here, what I find really intriguing is the sort of mirroring effect. So, of course, we have the animal collective, but we also have the human collective, the crowd of people watching. So there is this very, very intriguing resonance through the collective. What we have here is an effective relationship that brings together two groups, a human one and a non-human one. But I think this shared experience of collectivity is really where sort of the vanishing point for human non-human distinctions in the passage, and it's also where it formulates its strongest critique of human non-human boundaries. Yeah, this is it. Very curious about your thoughts on the passage, Marco.
Wonderful, Marco. This was very kort and bondig in Dutch, say, very focused, and also thank you for being so brief. And now Marco Vespa.
Yes, thank you so much, Marco Caracciolo, for the inspiring thoughts, and I think some of it will resonate with what I will try to show you. I wanted to share my screen. I will try to do it. I don't know very much Teams, but
you go up. There is this share, and you must open already the PowerPoint or whatever you had on your screen previously, and then you
yes,
tap Windows. Yeah.
Can you see it?
Perfect. Yeah, perfect.
Great. Let's see. Can you see?
Yeah,
the
yeah.
slideshow? Okay, perfect.
It's
so thank you
not
so
full
much.
screen, but maybe it doesn't matter.
I think it
It's
doesn't
not
matter.
full screen?
Yeah, it's not full screen, but you know what? Sometimes if you have full screen, it doesn't go farther. So I don't know. I mean, being on the screen, it is perfectly perceivable like that. But whatever you can try to make the PowerPoint presentation if you want to.
I tried to make it, so
yeah, it was down. I mean, normally I click over down. Yeah, that one, but it's not happening. So okay, whatever.
Okay, so okay, it's fine. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share this small analysis of these passages. And the reason why I chose this text is mainly because it's now some years I've been working on human-elephants interaction in the ancient world for several reasons, mainly related to my interest in ancient games and play culture in antiquity. And so this episode was one of my starting point. And every time I go back to this text, I have a different perspective on it. I don't know if it is a good sign or not, especially because I would like to write something like kind of anthropology of human-elephants relations in the ancient Roman culture. So this will be like one of the, let's say, the most important part of this analysis. And I will try to show something that I've been analyzing differently from the past, from what I did in the past. And you will tell me what you think. I would be, of course, grateful for any kind of feedback and the discussion that will develop. I will try to read my part because I don't want to go beyond time limits. So, the text I will propose today comes from the opening section of Book 8 of Pliny the Elder's Naturalis Historia. As is well known, this book belongs to the so-called zoological section of the work. And it is devoted to what Pliny calls terrestrial animals, what we would define perhaps as mammals in modern scientific terms. Pliny's account opens with an extensive section on a single animal, the elephant, which occupies a substantial portion of the book, more than 25 chapters. So it's a lot. Toward the end of this section about the elephants, the tone shifts. Pliny adopts what we might call an analytic or memorial perspective, sketching a kind of Roman cultural memory of human-animal and human-elephants, in this case, interactions. It is within the framework that the key episode appears, involving Pompey the Great. We are in late summer 55 BCE, probably in August, and Pompey, serving his second consulship, organizes special munera to celebrate the dedication of the Temple of Venus Victrix, built at the top of his stone theater complex in the Campus Martius. This is a highly ritualized and celebratory context, a sequence of spectacles, munera, offered to the Roman people, of course, but also to the gods, who are understood to be present. Here you have the Circus Maximus and the reconstruction by University of Caen in France, which is quite faithful to what was likely to be. And the gods were present especially through the pulvinar, the sacred space reserved for divine statues, where gods were meant to presentify their essence or whatever, their power. On the final day of this program, there is the inclusion of ritual hunts or venationes, staged in the Circus Maximus, so not in the theater, but in the circus. as violent hunting spectacles performed before both human and divine spectators. The section of the text I'm focusing on can be divided into two main parts, as you read in the English translation or in the Latin original. The first represents what we might call the expected, so almost normative script of a venatio. A group of elephants is brought into the arena of the Circus Maximus and set against a small contingent of Getulians. These Getulians are most likely enslaved Africans staged as hunters from North Africa, the region where such hunting practices were culturally associated and well known in the Roman imaginary. In this sense, the scene is carefully constructed to evoke a recognizable and culturally coded form of hunting. What we see here is the venatio as it is supposed to unfold. The Getulian, fighting on horseback probably, and armed with spears, perform the role of hunters, while the elephants respond by confronting them directly, engaging in a kind of staged duel with the mounted fighters. So this part of the episode follows, let's say, a predictable script. It presents the spectacle as an ordered and intelligible performance in which both humans and non-human animals act according to the roles that the audience is meant to recognize and interpret. The second part of Pliny's narrative stages a complete reversal of these expectations. The spectacle, as you read, no longer unfolds according to its prescribed script. Instead, it breaks down. The ritual hunt is abruptly interrupted as the elephants attempt to break through the barriers of the edge of the arena. At this point, the animals no longer behave as elements, if we want to say, within a controlled performance. They disrupt the very framework of the spectacle, and this disruption provokes an unprecedented reaction from the Roman audience. What we witness then is not simply a deviation, but the failure of the spectacle itself, and by extension, a failure of the organizers' intentions, in this case of Pompey the Great. Pliny presents this episode as having long-lasting consequences, and this is a very important point for me. The emotional and cultural impact on the audience was such that it was remembered across generations and even led, according to the tradition, to modifications in the architectural structures of the circus, from the time of Caesar through to that of Nero. So the episode moves from a controlled, ritualized performance to a moment of rupture that challenges both the logic of the spectacle and its broader cultural framework. The central importance of this episode in the construction of Roman cultural memory has often been underestimated in recent scholarship, in ancient history, but above all in human-animal studies. Yet Pliny himself explicitly connects the failure of the venatio of 55 with Pompey's later political decline. It is difficult to say whether Pliny is drawing here on earlier historiographical traditions, on popular opinion, or even on circulating rumors. But the implication is clear. Pompey's loss of support was not only political, involving the populace, but also religious. The Roman crowd, moved by compassion for the elephants, responds with curses and ritual prayers directed against Pompey. In this perspective, Pompey ultimately pays the penalty for the massacre. The expression diras luere or poenas luere suggests exactly this idea of expiation and retribution. The consequences seem to unfold across Pompey's later career. The loss of political ground to Caesar, his departure from Rome, and finally his death in Egypt. So an apparently marginal event, the interruption of a hunting spectacle, becomes in Roman cultural memory the starting point of a much larger political and perhaps moral narrative. In the first part of the text, it is especially important to focus on the type of spectacle being constructed, that is, on its staged and fictional dimension. What is striking is the complete absence of the usual vocabulary of hunting. There are no references to nets, traps, or auxiliary animals such as dogs, which are typically used in hunting scenarios. Instead, Pliny uses the expression viginti pugnavere in circo, gaetulis ex adverso iaculantibus. This describes a frontal confrontation. The phrase ex adverso suggests direct face-to-face engagement, a proxemic configuration of combat between two opposing sides. This is not the usual structure of a venatio with herbivores, where animals flee and humans pursue them, often with the help of other animals like dogs.
Sorry to interrupt, Marco, sorry.
Yes.
Do you want to show the text? I don't know whether you prepared the other slides, because we are still on this slide. I don't know whether you were.
Wow. Which slide are you in?
The circus slide.
Okay. So this is a problem because I was.
Yeah. Okay. That will. Yeah.
Now can you see?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
so I will not use the presentation mode because it's creates problems. So
exactly. That was
okay.
the problem. Okay.
I'm sorry. So I will try to make it. This is perhaps the most important. The other was the English translation, so it's okay.
Okay. Perfect.
I can. Thank you very much. So what does the use of pugnavere imply here? One possibility is to read it as a simply rhetorical trope, a metaphor that frames the killing of elephants in terms of military combat. But I would like to suggest another interpretation. The staging of the spectacle involves a kind of redefinition of roles, a retranslation of the scenic identities assigned to the participants. In this framework, the elephants, described as fighters, pugnantes, we might say, are constructed as quasi-human opponents. They are not merely hunted animals, but adversaries, humanized figures engaged in a duel on equal terms. The spectacular dimension of the venatio described by Pliny effectively rewrites, or perhaps better conceals, the bloody violence of the confrontation between elephants and Getulians by transforming it into something else. In the first part of the text, it becomes clear that what attracts the audience's attention is not the suffering or the bloodshed itself, but rather the extraordinary and unprecedented nature of the spectacle. At one point, a giant elephant, crippled by wounds to its legs, half dead and still dragging itself across the arena in an attempt to defend itself from human attacks, is perceived by the audience as a mirabilis dimicatio, an astonishing feat of combat, something exceptional and worthy of collective attention. Immediately afterward, another act of violence is similarly aestheticized, the killing of an elephant with a single, perfectly aimed spear strike, entering beneath the eye and reaching directly into the brain, is presented not as a slaughter, but as a display of technical mastery, almost a circus performance. Pliny describes it again as a magnum miraculum, great marvel. So throughout the first phase of the narrative, the arena transforms violence into spectacle through a language of wonder, admiration, and performative skill. This spectacular dimension functions as a kind of interpretive filter through which the actions taking place in the arena are perceived, at least for a certain period of time. What we see is a process of retranslation produced by the fictional framework of the performance itself. In other words, the violence staged in the arena, in the circus, undergoes a double coding. Every gesture is reinterpreted within the ludic context of the spectacle, of the munus, and acquires a different meaning. Bloodshed, suffering, even the smell of death are neutralized in favor of spectacle and entertainment. What dominates the audience perception is the artistic and acrobatic dimension of the performance. Violent actions are interpreted sub specie ludi as elements of the game, almost as if the elephants were not mortally wounded or terrified by human aggression. Pliny himself suggests this perspective when he describes the reaction of the spectators. At one point, an elephant tears shields from the arms of the Getulian, so he snatches these shields from their arms, and all the shields fall. They spin through the air before landing on the sand of the arena. The audience interprets this desperate and violent gesture not as an act of panic, but as a display of circus skill, as though the elephants had intentionally thrown the shields into the air to produce an elegant visual effect. The result is admiration and pleasure, voluptas, a moment of collective enjoyment generated precisely through the spectacular reframing of violence. After this initial phase of combat, the bloodshed and mortal wounds produce what we might describe as a traumatic emotional shock in the animals. At that point, the elephants attempt to escape beyond the iron barriers of the Circus Maximus. Pliny emphasizes that this was a collective reaction, universi eruptionem tentavere. All of them try to break out. This moment becomes, in a sense, the first major element preserved in Roman cultural memory of this event. According to the tradition reported by Pliny, Later modifications to the structure of the Circus Maximus were linked to this dramatic episode. In particular, the creation of a separating trench or channel, the Euripus, already associated with Julius Caesar in the late Republic and maintained at least until the reign of Nero, was understood as a response to the attempted escape of the elephants. The episode seemed to have generated panic among the spectators themselves. The term vexatio suggests violent disturbance, confusion, chaotic movement within the crowd. So the loss of control inside the arena did not remain confined to the animals. It spread outward, threatening the audience and destabilizing the very spatial and symbolic boundaries of the spectacle. The elephants' attempted escape represent a moment of rupture that interrupts the continuity of the hunting spectacle. It is a traumatic event that breaks apart the ludic fiction sustaining the performance. The ritual framework established by the ludi, or by the munera in this case, begins to collapse. And with it, the double coding that had allowed the audience to perceive the event simultaneously as ritual and entertainment. At this point, the violence of the elephants, the brutality of the confrontation, the bloodshed, and the immediate possibility of death can no longer be contained within the symbolic space of the arena. Instead, these elements spread outward and begin to affect the spectators themselves. The audience is no longer protected by the fictional distance created by the spectacle. The emotional and physical threat escapes the limit of the performance and becomes something directly experienced, producing a profound disruption in the relationship between spectators, non-human animals, and ritual violence. After the failed attempt to escape, the elephant in the arena, the elephant became protagonist of a completely different form of interspecies interaction from the one staged earlier in the spectacle. The communicative focus is no longer directed toward the designating opponents of the performance, so the Getulians. Instead, the elephants redirect their behavior toward the spectators themselves. This shift seems to occur only once the animals recognize that escape is impossible and that resistance within the arena can no longer succeed. One detail that is particularly significant in Pliny's designation of the animals is their designation as Pompeiani, Pompey's elephants. The adjective, I think, is very important. By identifying the elephants in this way, the text symbolically links their suffering and impending death to Pompey's own responsibilities as the organizer or editor of the spectacle. The animals become not merely victims within the arena, but creatures whose fate reflects directly back upon the political authority of the consul that staged the event. Pliny's narrative construction of the episode reveals several important rhetorical strategies that produce a highly distinctive portrayal of the elephant in the Circus Maximus. Compared, for example, to other accounts, most notably Caesar's version of this same episode in one of his Epistolae ad Familiares, the elephants here in Pliny actively seek the compassion of the Roman audience, especially that of the vulgus, the common people. Pliny's wording is particularly significant, misericordiam vulgi quaerentes. The elephants are described as intentionally searching for pity, as if acting according to a deliberate communicative strategy. In Caesar's account of the same event, by contrast, the central role belongs entirely to the Roman spectators, to the Roman audience. It is the people confronted with the violence inflicted on the elephants who experience compassion and likely demand the interruption of the venati. In Pliny's version, however, agency shifts dramatically toward the animal themselves. The elephants become active participants in a complex semiotic exchange. Their gestures and movements are represented not merely as instinctive reactions, but as meaningful communicative acts directed toward the Roman audience. At the center of this new communicative strategy is the verb supplicavere. The elephants are described as performing a form of supplicatio, in other words, an act of prayer, or supplication if you want. Outside formal institutional rituals, this vocabulary usually refers to prayers addressed to the gods. And although the gods are not explicitly mentioned here, Pliny strongly suggests that the elephants are invoking them. This changes the entire meaning of the scene. The animals are no longer simply victims inside a spectacle, they become ritual actors capable of meaningful communication. This is reinforced by Pliny's use of the word habitus. The term is very close to the Greek schema, a bodily posture that carries meaning. Gestures and bodily configurations could function as nonverbal signs. So the elephants' bodies themselves become communicative. Their posture is interpreted as a gesture of supplication, capable of transmitting suffering and appealing emotionally both to the gods and to the Roman crowd. In the condensed expression supplicavere inerrabili habitu, Pliny seems to allude to the specific arrangement and movement of the elephant's trunks, most likely raised toward the sky in a gesture of prayer and desperate appeal to the gods. In Pliny's text, this remains implicit rather than fully described. But a few generations later, Cassius Dio, drawing on important Roman historiographical traditions, makes this gesture explicit, stating that the elephants raise their trunks up toward the sky. Eston uranon aneteino. What matters here is that the elephants' bodies are represented and constructed as producing a recognizable ritual gesture. Their posture becomes legible within Roman culture as a bodily act of supplication directed toward the divine sphere. So the circus is transformed once again, no longer simply a space of spectacle, but a space in which animals themselves appear capable of entering into ritual communication with the gods before the eyes of the Roman people. Although it is difficult to reconstruct a standardized proxemics of the ritual of supplicatio, it is both possible and likely that hand gestures played an important semiotic role in codifying prayer directed towards the gods. In particular, we should think of raised hands turned upward toward the sky in a supine position. This gesture is clearly represented, for example, on this bronze coin issued during the 14th consulship of the Emperor Domitian, 88 CE. In that case, the supplicatio belongs to an official institutional context. The consul or the Pontifex Maximus leads Roman matrons in prayer in order to obtain divine attention and favor. But what matters for my argument is that the gesture itself, the upward-facing hands directed toward the sky, seems to function more broadly as a recognizable sign of prayer, even outside formal ritual settings. This is important because it helps us understand how Roman spectators may have interpreted the elephant's bodily posture in the arena as a visible gesture of supplication directed toward the gods. The elephant's communicative behavior seems to rely on multiple forms of nonverbal language. It is not limited to the powerful gestural sign represented by their raised trunk, but also includes another type of non-linguistic signal that communication theory would describe as an affect display. In this case, the communicative sign is weeping. Tears function as an analogical sign. They express emotional suffering in a direct and immediately intelligible way. Pliny's choice of vocabulary is particularly significant here. It does not simply describe the elephant as crying. The verb he uses conveys the intensity and violence of their laments. The prefix cum attached to plorare suggests collective and overwhelming grief, a desperate and uncontrollable outburst of mourning. So the animal suffering is communicated not through speech, of course, but through bodily signs that Roman spectators could nonetheless interpret emotionally and culturally with great immediacy. I'm going to the conclusion. The elephant's weeping combined with the gesture of supplication toward the gods and indirectly toward the human audience produces a true contagion of tears. The spectators themselves begin to cry. At this point, a mechanism of reciprocity is activated, one that seems deeply embedded in Roman cultural norms, at least in the normative representation preserved by texts of Roman cultural memory, especially the Enneads. And this dynamic was analyzed brilliantly some years ago by the wonderful book by Licini and Ricotilli, the gesture and words in Enneads. Within this cultural framework, tears are not emotionally neutral. When someone adopts a posture of vulnerability, submission, and renunciation of violence, their tears demand a response. To remain indifferent would mean placing oneself at the margin of humanitas, violating essential social and moral expectations. From a pragmatic point of view, then the elephants become extraordinarily effective communicators. Through gesture, posture, and weeping, they succeed in obtaining misericordia, compassion from the Roman crowd, the interruption of the venatio, and ultimately the end of the massacre directed against them. This leaves us with the final question: how exactly does Pliny frame these episodes of the elephant's tears, and more broadly, this entire scene of non-verbal communication between non-human animals and humans? Pliny's narrative perspective suggests something far more complex than a simple emotional reaction accidentally produced by the elephants. The text strongly implies that the animals behave as socially competent actors. They appear capable of understanding human forms of communication and even of mastering culturally coded behaviors. In other words, the elephants seem to know how to pray, how to supplicate, and how to elicit compassion through recognizable gestures and emotional signs. They know how to act upon humans precisely because they possess the cultural codes necessary for communication. This interpretation fits well with the opening section of this book 8, where Pliny repeatedly emphasizes the elephant's intellectus. Of course, we all know intellectus does not mean intelligence in our modern cognitive sense. In Roman culture, was something much more complex. Intellectus could refer more to the capacity to recognize, interpret, and respond appropriately to complex signs and situations. Within the ancient cultural imagination, as represented by Pliny in this case, elephants are animals that know and recognize the rituals, languages, and behaviors of others, where these others are humans. And in this episode, perhaps above all, they know when and how to weep. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marco Vespa, for this very rich and intriguing presentation. And I usually give the word to the first speaker. If Marco would like to add something or ask something, you are free to do so now. And please, the other participants who would like to ask a question, please let me know either by raising your hands, your little hands in the screen, or just jumping in a discussion. We are a small group, so this is pretty much feasible.
No, I want to thank Marco for what I thought was a very illuminating reading, and indeed there were some resonances between our readings, but I have to say I did miss the religious dimension that Marco's presentation highlighted very nicely. It's something that maybe didn't translate very well, or I just missed it when I read about the elephant's gestures of entreaty. I was now thinking about the religious connotations of that action, whereas I think it makes a lot of sense. It really adds something to the passage. Then maybe also, I mean, this is a bit anachronistic maybe, but it does seem to resonate with some very interesting philosophical questions on whether animals are capable of religious or spiritual experience. Maybe, I thought that was really interesting. So
this is very. If I can react, Marco.
Yeah.
No, this is a very interesting point, because when I approached this text like some years ago, you're right. Many translations, but also like in the Latin of Pliny especially, there is not an explicit mention of the religious dimension.
Right.
But then if you go to analyze a bit the cultural context of this, for example, the Circus Maximus and the presence of the gods, and the presence in the pulvinar, in the space, sacred space for divine statues, and the temple of Sol, of the sun, which was in the Circus Maximus, and the temple of Sol, like in other tradition, and Pliny explicitly says that the elephants had a special relation with some kind of, let's say, planets, what were called planets, and especially with the Sol, with the sun, conceived as a deity. They were considered to be like really like ritual performance of kind of sun salutation, if you want, of the sun and the moon. And this Pliny says it very explicitly in the beginning of this book, of book 8. And also, like more generally, the context of the munera, and it is munera consecrated during a religious practice, which was the consecration of the temple of Venus Victrix. So there is this component of like religious component, which for me is very, very important, but it's very fascinating to understand why the translators or the commentators of this passage did not underline these aspects, which is culturally very important for me. And this, I will just say this last word, and this religious aspect is very present, for example, in some other accounts of the same episode, for example, in this passage of Cassius Dio, so much later than Pliny, of course, but he explicitly says that all the population, all the audience, interpreted the trunks of the elephants as an appeal to the gods because the humans had broken some kind of orkos, some kind of pact, some kind of, let's say, alliance, if you want, between humans and elephants. So, yeah.
Fascinating, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, we have two questions. Vicente first, and then John.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to both Marcos. The text is very fascinating, and the expositions also. I was wondering, Marco, Vespa, maybe not only the religious part is present, but also I think the political one, which what you mentioned also, and they go together. For example, in a little later in Martial, you will find it. Also, maybe you know it. You're talking about Pliny, but I'm working on Martial. I'm also thinking of some epigrams about this supplicantes elephants with the emperor, and then you have this religious and political level that go together, and it's very Roman, no, so very imperial, and that's at the end what's happening here with Pompey and Caesar, and people going like more for Caesar, and Caesar saying, okay, I will use this for my advantage, then doing a game himself without killing elephants, no?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. And like, even if someone is not interested in this dimension of human-animal interactions and human-animal studies, what is striking, I think, for everyone is what Pliny says, and I think is the only one to say that Pompey the Great paid the price of his catastrophe in political terms, but also in terms of life, because of that episode. So this is very fascinating. I mean, Pliny thinks that the political career of Pompey was determined, or at least it presents this story as determining the failure of the political career of Pompey because of this kind of blasphemy, if you want, against the gods and against especially the pact between the elephants and the humans. So this is very fascinating. And so of course, the political dimension is very present and interconnected. Thank you, Vicente.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, both Marcos. I thought both of the presentations really worked very well, particularly Marco Caracciolo. You in one of your points about the collectivity of both groups, and in fact, it comes out in the Latin, universi. They all acted together, and then the populus universus, the people, act all together. I'd also like to note, in following up some of the discussion here, that usually when one talks about this building, it's referred to as the Theater of Pompey, whereas here Pliny starts out by actually only calling it the Temple of Venus of Victory. And of course, the theatrical part is, in a way, a kind of subtext here, because he's talking about spectacle, spectare, spectaculum, and so forth, these key words here. But the mention of the temple, in a way, sets up, I think, one of the central points, Marco Vespa, that you were making about the religious dimension, that it's not just an entertainment, but there is a ritualistic element here. And I would suggest that maybe it's even more pronounced than you suggested, because we have the supplicavere, the prayer or the supplication, both to the gods and to the crowd. But then this is responded to in a way, or echoed or mirrored by the people themselves. Imprecaretur, diras. So they are, praying, cursing, but they're delivering a ritual which echoes the ritualistic of the animal. So another, echoing in the collectivity of what's going on, also the ritual element. And then also, as you pointed out, luit, the final ritual element, is the expiation of this by Pompey, who pays for this, so that there's a kind of a ritual sequence, the prayer of the elephants in their lament, the prayer of the people, which responds to the prayer of the element in their lament, and then finally, in the future, he will soon pay in response to this. So it's a neat sort of chain of ritual, and I think it's all set up by Pliny by insisting that this is not the theater of Pompey, it's the temple of Venus of victory. Anyway, those were my thoughts.
Thank you very much, John. It's a very important point, and I will take this into account. I want, if I can, just 1 minute to go back to this point of the collectivity that Marco was talking about, and I think that you're right here. There is this universus, universi, so there is this dimension. But I always ask myself, and I'm a bit working on it. So if you have some suggestions, Pliny stages the request of like the appeal to the people, not to the populus, but to the vulgus. He says the quaerentes misericordiam vulgi. And vulgus normally, at least in Cicero, but also in Pliny, when they are talking about spectacle audiences, is a bit different from universus. It seems to specify a particular part, so the plebs urbana, or like the most, like the plebs mainly, probably some slaves that could go to the spectacles as part of the audience, but for sure not the senators, not the elites of the society. So I was asking if this also is suggesting like a kind of strategy of the elephants. The elephant choose to whom they want to address their appeal. And probably the vulgus could be selected for some reason. Probably because they can be more emotionally sensible or responsive to the elephants, differently from, I don't know, some kind of leaders of the Senate, which are, I don't know, from the perspective of Pliny, I'm saying. So this is something that, in a sense, interrupts this collectivity of universus in the fact that the elephant chooses a specific target of the audience. But I don't have an answer. So if you have some answer or like suggestion, I'm very happy to hear. Thank you, John.
Yeah, maybe we can continue. We have two questions by Laura and Pietro. Then first, Laura, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much to you both. I would also have a small question for Marco Vespa. I was really sort of intrigued by this little aside in the middle that kind of breaks up the Pompeian narrative, that you have Caesar adding sort of a safety belt, and then Nero taking it away. Nick taking it away to put the equites sort of instead, and then and so at first I was like, well, maybe he didn't have like no elephant plays of Nero mentioned, but then Pliny does go on to mention elephants in the same space also for Claudius and Nero. So I was kind of wondering if you had any thoughts on that, because my intuition would be that that's that might be part of the sort of the political dimension that was already mentioned, that it may be part of the sort of wider representation in the natural history of Nero as a sort of a bad emperor who doesn't really care. And there's of course also all these stories about Nero forcing senators to be part of displays and of theater sort of performances that they don't want to. So I don't know. Yeah, it was just a thought. I was wondering what you would think about that.
Thank you, Laura. I didn't think a lot about this part. What I can say is that for me there are some question marks. So why this kind of channel of this trench, so the Euripus, was built for elephants, and for example, never, I mean, not never, but they were never related to, for example, big cats like lions or gepards. So why only the elephants are associated with these traumatic events? We can imagine, I don't know, I'm just making an hypothesis that also lions try to escape to the other side. But there is no mention of that. So again, I don't have an answer. And what is interesting is that if you look in Pliny, but also in Cassius and in other texts, the percentage of this kind of spectacle, so the venatio, the violent spectacle with or against elephants, are much less than other kind of animal. In the sense that I don't want to say that the episode of Pompeii was a kind of cultural shock that blocked this kind of spectacles, because Pliny says that Caesar did the same. Of course, only with the Euripus, but he did the same. But in the course of the tradition, for example, Germanicus puts elephant on show, but never to make them fight or make them killed. He set a show of elephants in order to show their acrobatic performance. So I'm sure that there is like a political dimension of these parts. I didn't think about it, so I will do it. And if you have some ideas, I'm open to listen.
Okay, I see also Marco Caracciolo. I don't know whether, Marco, this is a follow-up on this specific question or... Okay,
yes,
so Pietro, if you don't mind, I would like to have Marco.
Yeah, I thought this was a very interesting question, and indeed something that we didn't really discuss, neither of us. But while reading this, and of course I don't have all the historical context that you guys have, but I also found it very nonlinear in a sense. Temporally speaking, it jumps back and forth in a way that does raise some questions, I would say. My reading was, well, maybe genre plays a role here too. So the purpose of this account is not, telling a coherent narrative. It's more encyclopedic, and that allows, this type of temporal instability. But also, I think Pliny is setting up an emotional progression here. So, in a sense, what matters is not a temporality of the events, but the type of emotional trajectory that he wants to create through these images of elephants and humans interacting in the temple or arena. And that's where I saw this crescendo almost of closeness between animals and humans. So I thought the way the story is put together very nicely supports this trajectory from a more kinetic response to the animals, to a sense of shared vulnerability and then collectivity.
Okay, thank you. Pietro wanted to say something.
I'm just noticing that we're running out of time. So to put it simply and shortly,
we have 5 minutes. Yeah, because we started later. Don't
worry. I just wanted to remember that humans can react this way towards elephants because elephants are proximi humanis sensibus. I mean, they are not just like the other animals. They are peculiar kind of animals. Elephants are a peculiar kind of animals, such as lions, which are kings of nature, the kings of the wild side of the animality, and as kings they can display examples of clemencia, so to say. And another question, since Pliny views animals as partes naturae, I'm just wondering whether in Pliny's perspective, the crime against elephants committed by Pompey can be perceived as a crime against nature, against a single part of nature, which is represented by elephants. And another question is about the fact that, well, that elephants are a kind of well, never mind. This is a very long question. We can talk about it another time later. I will talk to Mark about this. So I'm just stopped with these two questions.
Okay, thank you, Pietro. Yeah, if you want to say something, Marco and Marco.
Yes, I can say that. Please, Marco, you can. Okay. Yeah, it's just to say that I think that this dimension of like subversion of the right way you should behave inside nature and towards other parts of nature is of course there. I think it's also related to something else, that in this particular context, there is not only like to put on show elephants and to, in a sense, to force them to be like killed and abused by humans in a sacred space, but is related to also the occasion. So there are some passages, I think, in Tacitus, I think in Tacitus, where he relates the fact that Pompey was very much criticized because he wanted to construct this theater in a sacred space. And again, it's and for this reason he had to, like, according to some tradition, that he had to put like this temple on the top of the theater. So this dimension of breaking some kind of norms, breaking some kind of rules, which at the same time, I have some difficulty to speak about nature as disconnected from all this. For me, it's something related. The ritual dimension, the religious dimension of this episode is related to their, let's say, to their being part of nature, in the sense that elephants have a special relations with gods, and especially with some gods, especially in their natural environments. So in Africa and in the Atlas. So these were part of kind of common and shared knowledge. And of course, like taking them, putting in a sacred space and abusing them, of course, it's making violence against other parts of nature, as you said. Yeah, but we can speak about this, I hope, very soon.
Marco Caracciolo.
Yeah, just very quickly, I was thinking about something related to what Marco just said. So the way his analysis identified essentially the religious or spiritual, maybe even dimension of the entreaty, but also the element of disruption. So the fact that the elephants are kind of breaking out of this context of the spectacle and creating mayhem, essentially. And I wonder how those things are related, right? The disruption and the religious element. Because, you know, this could be a highly regulated, I don't know, sacrificial almost context that doesn't require any disruption on the part of the animals because it's all scripted, it's all, you know, predictable, whereas it's not. So I wonder if there isn't maybe some tension between these two dimensions of the text, or maybe there isn't. But I'm really interested in that, you know, departure from expectations and how that might speak or not speak to the religious element. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know it's a big question.
Yeah.
Marco, if you want to say something very quickly, so then we are going, or you can leave it like
Yeah. I don't have an answer. So.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a
But if you want
question.
to add something, please do. I mean, I don't know, a nuance to this commentary offered by Caracciolo.
It's
okay. Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, then we can close this conversation. Thank you so much for presenting Marco and Marco. And I also have to announce that also the following Binomio will be delayed one day. It's not the 26th, but will be the 27th. But you, of course, you will be receiving the announcement as always. So thank you so much again for participating in this very interesting, exciting discussion. And I hope to see you soon online or personally. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have
a nice evening.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.